Can you identify any communities without water scarcity? That is, who's doing it right and what we can learn from them?
There are lots of places in the world doing it right. The key is to pick places that look like you all and that so have similar problems. So one of my favorite examples of a place doing it right is in fact Las Vegas. Las Vegas has 2.5 million residents. The amount of water that Las Vegas gets was set back in about 1935, when Las Vegas had just 15,000 inhabitants. So how does Las Vegas survive with a water allotment made when they had 15,000 inhabitants, now that they have 2.5 million, 3 million inhabitants? Las Vegas recycles every single gallon of water that hits a drain anywhere in the entire community. They are, in fact, the most effective at recapturing water and recycling it. 94% of the water that the utility supplies every day is recaptured, cleaned, returned to the lake, and reused. Well, the climate of Las Vegas may have something in common with you guys, but that's not a good solution to your problems. And in fact, the water use, what I was told by Dylan is, if everybody in the city of San Miguel de Allende stopped using water, could somehow miraculously go a year without using water at all, the aquifer would still be overdrawn, because most of the water use that causes that problem is agricultural. And so you need to figure out an incentive system to grapple with that kind of problem. In point of fact, it is a really, really complicated problem to persuade farmers to use their water differently, when all of the economic incentives that have been set up are for them to just pump harder. As I said, we actually have exactly the same kind of problem, different consequences, because we're a different country here in the US with the Aglala. And so, so there are, that in fact, you've asked exactly the right question. The best way to tackle water problems is to start out by saying, what's our problem? Okay, who else has had a problem like this? And what have they done to solve it? And does what they've done give us some solutions we can use, or are we so different in other ways that that doesn't work? But that is step one, because point one, every water problem has been solved. There are no new water problems. The politics and the human relations issues are what really often slows things down.
Thank you, Charles. I'm back now, and there's one question I'll pass along. If you see one in the chat box, help yourself, Charles. This has really been a wonderfully inspiring talk. One of our members, Cliff Durand, poses this question. Something like 90% of water usage in our area is by commercial agriculture producing for export to the U.S. We are exporting our water to the U.S. so U.S. people can enjoy off-season vegetables. The economic interests in maintaining this are powerful. What can we do to overcome this? And you are muted, Charles.
Cliff, you're asking exactly the right question in some ways, but what I would say is that what a community like you all in particular, expat Americans living in San Miguel de Allende, can do is simply educate yourselves, is understand the dimensions of the problem, the complexity of the problem. I talked to Dylan. He was really generous. I think our conversation lasted 90 minutes or more. And the layers of the agricultural problem are really intense. There are agricultural interests in the U.S. who want this produce. There are producers. There are people used to drawing the water out in San Miguel de Allende area and using it. There are bureaucrats in the Department of Agriculture and water management bureaucrats tugging in different directions. There are management systems, well drilling oversight systems, all kinds of layers of complexity. If the Mexicans decided that they wanted to solve this problem, even for Mexicans in positions of political power, it would be challenging and it would take time, and they would need a very smart strategy that changed the incentives on overusing water. Actually, one of the most powerful ways of changing the equation would be for the US companies to say, we don't want you to do this way anymore. I wrote a book about Walmart before I wrote the water book. It's actually considered the definitive text on how Walmart does what it does. And although Americans today don't like to take this in, Walmart is now, in 2020, probably the most powerful environmentalist in the world. The single force for making the environment better. They move swiftly. They don't need to ask anybody. They have so much power that when they say to Chinese factories, you will do it this way or we will buy it somewhere else, those factories change the way they operate. In the space of 5 years, Walmart doubled the gas mileage of long-haul trucks. Not just their own, everybody's in the world. And they gave their insights away. The gas mileage of long-haul trucks hadn't changed in 40 years. In the space of 5 years, Walmart cut the energy necessary to run a Walmart supercenter by a third. That means every time Walmart opens 3 new ones, the 4th one essentially uses no energy. Now you can say, yeah, but the real solution is no more Walmart. But that's not going to happen. So you want companies of that scale to do the right thing. They live in the world too. Their employees live in the world too. So in some ways, the quickest path to changing what's going on is for the big customers of that produce to say, we want to keep buying it from you, but we want you all to change the way you produce it so that producing it for us doesn't damage you. But there is a lot of complexity in that. And so I would say, although you all think rightly that's the most serious problem, I would say work on the aspects of the problem that are easier to tackle and learn as much as you can about the layers of complexity. It would be like Mexicans moving to Houston and saying, boy, this oil and gas thing y'all got going on here is a mess. Let us clear it up for you. I'm not sure how welcome that would be, even if they were right. So you need to check in at the level where you can be useful and helpful, while also watching what else is going on.
Thank you, Charles. You're saying that Walmart has had a conversion? Wow, I didn't realize that. Want to ask you something about climate change. How does climate change factor into the water problems here and into the points you made? We didn't hear climate change yet come off of your lips this morning.
That's true. Because climate change, of course, makes everything more complicated. And just in talking to Dylan and talking to Michael and talking to you guys the other day, I heard a lot of the rainfall seems like this year and like this last year, and it seems like it's changing. And what I would say about climate change is, look, climate change isn't going to make the problems that the San Miguel de Allende region faces easier. It's going to make them harder. And you don't actually know what the unintended consequences are. Maybe you could imagine a situation in which the total rainfall didn't change, but the time of year it fell changed. That's happening in lots of places. Maybe that would make growing the crops more difficult and unsustainable, and farmers would start doing something else. And so, although climate change was having a negative impact overall, actually the pressure on the aquifer eased up. You simply don't know. And so what I would say is that anything people can do along the lines of what I ticked off is only going to make things better, and that will be true as climate change takes hold. What I wouldn't do is support solutions that will only work if San Miguel de Allende's climate in 30 years looks exactly like it looks today. But building rain gardens, installing rain barrels, restoring wetlands and recharge areas to more natural, to the way they were more naturally, so that what does fall can get back into the aquifer. None of that is going to be a bad strategy. And so, again, it's a little bit like the agricultural use. You have to pay attention to what's going on and make sure you're not doing stuff that's at odds with how the climate is changing. But to be honest, it sounds like there's lots of progress to be made on the basics in the region. And I don't think that kind of progress will be wasted effort, even if the climate changes.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to encourage everyone listening that if you do have a question, pose it in the chat. Go ahead and write it in the chat.
And let me just say, some people have said not everybody's American, and I apologize for that. That is absolutely true.
We U.S. expats are always reminded of that by our wonderfully friendly Canadian expats. I'd like to share with everyone a quote that I found in your book, and it struck me, and I'm still scratching my head about it. If I might read a short paragraph. We do not have a water shortage. Every drop of water that's here has seen the inside of a cloud and the inside of a volcano, the inside of a maple leaf, and the inside of a dinosaur kidney, probably many times. What we have here is a profound quandary about what to do with the water we have. Wow.
Who wrote that sentence? That's a good sentence. There was this amazing moment in the course of writing this book. I wrote a story about bottled water for the magazine I worked for then, Fast Company. That's why I got to go to Fiji and to San Pellegrino. And then I decided to write a book about water problems, not bottled water, but the big picture. And I was 6 months into writing that book. And I was talking to a nephrologist, a kidney doctor, about the bizarre topic, what happens when you die of dehydration? Reporters often chase things that seem like they're going to be a good idea that turn out to be a waste of time. And if you're smart, you leave them out of the book. There's nothing in the book about how you die of dehydration. And this particular nephrologist was really boring. And as I was listening to him, I suddenly realized, for some reason, that I had no idea where the water on Earth came from. He was really boring. And I had spent 3 months writing about bottled water, 6 months working on a book that was due in a little more than a year and ended up taking much longer. And I suddenly realized that if I thought about Niagara Falls or I thought about the Pacific Ocean, I had no idea where the water in the Pacific Ocean had come from. How did it get there? We see the water cycle, starting in the second grade. It rains on the mountains, it runs down, we take it, it runs into the ocean, it evaporates, it falls on the mountains. Oh, we can all draw that diagram. Where did it come from in the first place? And I literally excused myself from the nephrologist, and I immediately set to figuring out where water had come from. And I spent the next 2 weeks talking to cosmologists and astronomers. All the water on Earth was formed out in space, one molecule at a time, hydrogens and oxygens finding each other, and then clinging as ice to asteroids and comets. And all that water was delivered as water to the Earth as the Earth was formed and shortly thereafter. There's no real mechanism on Earth geologically for creating new water. And there isn't really a mechanism for destroying water. The water we've got on Earth has all been here essentially forever. it has in fact been through the kidneys of the dinosaurs thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And that actually changed how I thought about water. Suddenly learning that the water had all been here forever and that it was born in space and delivered to Earth changed how I thought about the resource itself. But it also changed a little bit how, you look at, I happen to have a glass of water right here. You look at that water and think that water traveled to Earth from space. It gives you a little different sense of it. So you picked what I think of as a particularly appealing passage for this particular group of people.
Okay, well, Charles, we've totally enjoyed our encounter with you. I must say, it's been a pleasure to work with you on this service, and a surprising delight. There was nothing dry and boring about your talk.
If you look at the cover of the book, every water book in the history of the world is a dried, cracked lake bed with a dead tree, or a little water spigot with one drop coming out. And I said, I want an optimistic water book cover. So give me 1 minute to say a word about the book that came out since then. I went on from discovering that water came from space. That was my personal discovery. The actual scientists knew that, to writing about space. I had a book come out last summer about the race to the moon in the 1960s. And it is relevant in the following way. Going to the moon was impossible when John Kennedy said on May 25th, 1961, let's go to the moon. It wasn't sort of figuratively impossible. It was impossible. We had none of the technology necessary to go to the moon. 9 years later, Armstrong and Aldrin are bouncing around on the moon. Every problem of climate change is a water problem. Almost all the consequences of climate change are water related. And you know what? Just like the list I ticked off for you, we actually know how to tackle climate change. If you lined up 8 brilliant climatologists and public policy people and asked them separately for the top 10 things we could do to tackle climate change that would make a difference between now and 2030, the lists of 10 would converge. 5 or 6 of them on every list would be the same. It's not only not impossible, we know what to do. And so writing about how we got to the moon was such a break from the world we're sort of living in right this minute in order to get the book done for the anniversary last summer of the 50th landing. But it's also a reminder that we can actually tackle big problems and fix them. That's true of climate change in the big picture, and it's also true of the problems that San Miguel de Allende faces. There is no question those problems are fixable, but patient determination as well as urgency.
And we've got to go and do our part voting and get people who will listen to the scientists too and get the job done. Well, we will excuse you today, Charles. Thank you. We'll be talking about our time with you this morning for a very long time. It's been very memorable. Thank you very much. And
thank you guys. You've been great. I appreciate it.
We'll invite you to say goodbye, and we'll invite everyone else to stay connected for more general chat. And Charles, you're welcome to hang around too if you'd like. And we're always eager to welcome back Tom to share a perspective on what you've heard and any other goings on.
Just chime in another thank you to you, Charles. It was really a wonderful talk, and I love your positive message. And I always feel that those messages deliver a lot more of product than do the laments.
And I'm getting a message that Dylan Terrell of Caminos de Agua, who has spoken to our fellowship before, has been on the Zoom with us this morning. That is great. And I want to thank Dylan for all the time that you spent with Charles. And a special salute to Michael Hertz for bringing Charles's book and philosophy to the Sunday Service Committee, where we immediately said, well, I think it's a very long shot, but why don't you reach out to Charles and see if there's any way you could book him for a service. And a few months later, here we are, and that's part of getting people on the moon too, is getting Charles Fishman here on a Sunday morning in little old San Miguel.